Section 12 of Pirates of Panama, The Buccaneers of America, by A.O. Exquemelin. Translated by G.A. Williams. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Acacia Wood. Chapter 8, Part 2. Our pirates, therefore, had many canoes of the Indians in the Isle of Sambale, 5 leagues from the coasts of Yucatan. Here is great quantity of amber, but especially when any storm arises from towards the east, whence the waves bring many things, and very different. Through this sea no vessels can pass, unless very small, it being too shallow. In the lands that are surrounded by this sea, is found much campeche wood, and other things that serve for dyeing, much esteemed in Europe, and would be more, if we had the skill of the Indians, who make a dye or tincture that never fades. The pirates having been in that gulf 3 months, and receiving advice that the Spanish ship was come, hastened to the port where the ship lay at anchor unlading her merchandise, with design to assault her as soon as possible. But first they thought convenient to send away some of their boats to seek for a small vessel also expected, very richly laden with plate, indigo, and cochineal. Meanwhile the ship's crew, having notice that the pirates designed upon them, prepared all things for a good defense, being mounted with 42 guns, well furnished with arms and other necessaries, and 130 fighting men. To Lolonois all this seemed but little, for he assaulted her with great courage, his own ship carrying but 22 guns, and having no more than a small seitee, or flyboat, for help. But the Spaniards defended themselves so well, as they forced the pirates to retire. But the smoke of the powder continuing thick, as a dark fog or mist, with 4 canoes well manned, they boarded the ship with great agility, and forced the Spaniards to surrender. The ship being taken, they found not in her what they thought, being already almost unladen. All they got was only 50 bars of iron, a small parcel of paper, some earthen jars of wine, and other things of small importance. Then Lolonois called a council of war, and told them he intended for Guatemala. Hereupon they divided into several sentiments, some liking the proposal, and others disliking it, especially a party of them who were but raw in those exercises, and who imagined at their setting forth from Tortuga that pieces of 8 were gathered as easy as pears from a tree, but finding most things contrary to their expectation, they quitted the fleet and returned. Others affirmed they had rather starve than return home without a great deal of money. But the major part, judging the propounded voyage little to their purpose, separated from Lolonois and the rest. Of these one Moses Van Klein was ringleader, captain of the ship taken at Puerto Caballo. This fellow steered for Tortuga, to cruise to and fro in these seas. With him joined another comrade of his, by name Pierre le Picard, who, seeing the rest leave Lolonois, thought fit to do the same. These runaways having thus parted company, steered homewards, coasting along the continent till they came to Costa Rica. Here they landed a strong party nigh the river Veraguas, and marched in good order to the town of the same name. This they took and totally pillaged, though the Spaniards made a strong resistance. They brought away some of the inhabitants as prisoners, with all they had, which was of no great importance, by reason of the poverty of the place, which exerciseth no other trade than working in the mines, where some of the inhabitants constantly attend, while none seek for gold, but only slaves. These they compel to dig and wash the earth in the neighboring rivers, where often they find pieces of gold as big as peas. The pirates gaining in this adventure but 7 or 8 pounds weight of gold, they returned, giving over the design to go to the town of Nata, situate on the coasts of the South Sea, whose inhabitants are rich merchants, and their slaves work in the mines of Veraguas, being deterred by the multitudes of Spaniards gathered on all sides to fall upon them, whereof they had timely advice. Lolonois, thus left by his companions, remained alone in the Gulf of Honduras. His ship being too great to get out at the reflux of those seas, there he sustained great want of provisions, so as they were constrained to go ashore every day to seek sustenance, and not finding anything else, they were forced to kill and eat monkeys and other animals, such as they could find. At last, in the altitude of the Cape of Gracias a Dios, near a certain little island called de las Pertas, his ship struck on a bank of sand, where it stuck so fast as no art could get her off again, though they unladed all the guns, iron, and other weighty things, as much as they could. Hereupon they were forced to break the ship in pieces, and with planks and nails build themselves a boat to get away, and while they were busy about it, I shall describe the said isles and their inhabitants. The islands de las Pertas are inhabited by savage Indians, not having known or conversed with civil people. They are tall and very nimble, running almost as fast as horses. At diving also they are very dexterous and hardy. From the bottom of the sea I saw them take up an anchor of 600 weight, tying a cable to it with great dexterity, and pulling it from a rock. Their arms are made of wood, without any iron point, but some instead thereof use a crocodile's tooth. They have no bows nor arrows, as the other Indians have, but their common weapon is a sort of lance a fathom and a half long. Here are many plantations surrounded with woods, whence they gather abundance of fruits, as potatoes, bananas, racovan, ananas, and many others. They have no houses to dwell in, as at other places in the Indies. Some say they eat human flesh, which is confirmed by what happened when Lolonois was there. Two of his companions, one a Frenchman and the other a Spaniard, went into the woods, where having straggled a while, a troop of Indians pursued them. They defended themselves as well as they could with their swords, but at last were forced to flee. The nimble Frenchman escaped, but the Spaniard, being not so swift, was taken and heard of no more. Some days after, 12 pirates set forth well armed to seek their companion, among whom was the Frenchman, who conducted them and showed them the place where he left him. Here they found that the Indians had kindled a fire, and at a small distance they found a man's bones well roasted, with some pieces of flesh ill scraped off the bones, in one hand, which had only 2 fingers remaining, whence they concluded they had roasted the poor Spaniard. They marched on, seeking for Indians, and found a great number together, who endeavored to escape, but they overtook some of them, and brought aboard their ships 5 men and 4 women. With these they took much pains to make themselves be understood, and to gain their affections, giving them trifles, as knives, beads, and the like. They gave them also victuals and drink, but nothing would they taste. It was also observable that while they were prisoners they spoke not one word to each other, so that seeing these poor Indians were much afraid, they presented them again with some small things, and let them go. When they parted they made signs they would come again, but they soon forgot their benefactors, and were never heard of more, neither could any notice afterwards be had of these Indians, nor any others in the whole island, which made the pirates suspect that both those that were taken and all the rest of the islanders swam away by night to some little neighboring islands, especially considering they could never set eyes on any Indian more, nor any boat or other vessel. Meanwhile the pirates were very desirous to see their longboat finished out of the timber that struck on the sands. Yet considering their work would be long, they began to cultivate some pieces of ground. Here they sowed French beans, which ripened in 6 weeks, and many other fruits. They had good provision of Spanish wheat, bananas, racovan, and other things. With the wheat they made bread, and baked it in portable ovens brought with them. Thus they feared not hunger in those desert places, employing themselves thus for 5 or 6 months. Which passed, and the longboat finished, they resolved for the river of Nicaragua, to see if they could take some canoes, and return to the said islands for their companions that remained behind, by reason the boat could not hold so many men together. Hereupon, to avoid disputes, they cast lots, determining who should go or stay. The lot fell on one half of the people of the lost vessel, who embarked in the longboat, and on the skiff which they had before, the other half remaining ashore. Lolonois, having set sail, arrived in a few days at the river of Nicaragua. Here that ill fortune assailed him, of which long time had been reserved for him, as a punishment due to the multitude of horrible crimes committed in his licentious and wicked life. Here he met with both Spaniards and Indians, who jointly setting upon him and his companions, the greatest part of the pirates were killed on the place. Lolonois, with those that remained alive, had much ado to escape aboard their boats. Yet notwithstanding this great loss, he resolved not to return to those he had left at the Isle of Pertus, without taking some boats, such as he looked for. To this effect he determined to go on to the coasts of Carthagena, but God Almighty, the time of his divine justice being now come, had appointed the Indians of Darien to be the instruments and executioners thereof. These Indians of Darien are esteemed as bravos, or wild savage Indians, by the neighboring Spaniards, who never could civilize them. Hither Lolonois came, brought by his evil conscience that cried for punishment, thinking to act his cruelties, but the Indians within a few days after his arrival took him prisoner, and tore him in pieces alive, throwing his body limb by limb into the fire, and his ashes into the air, that no trace or memory might remain of such an infamous, inhuman creature. One of his companions gave me an exact account of this tragedy, affirming that himself had escaped the same punishment with the greatest difficulty. He believed also that many of his comrades, who were taken in that encounter by those Indians, were as their cruel captain torn in pieces and burnt alive. Thus ends the history, the life, and miserable death of that infernal wretch Lolonois, who, full of horrid, execrable, and enormous deeds, and debtor to so much innocent blood, died by cruel and butcherly hands, such as his own were in the course of his life. Those that remained in the island de las Pertas, waiting for the return of them who got away only to their great misfortune, hearing no news of their captain or companions, at last embarked on the ship of a certain pirate who happened to pass that way. This fellow came from Jamaica with intent to land at Gracias a Dios, and from thence to enter the river with his canoes, and take the city of Carthagena. These two crews of pirates being now joined, were infinitely glad at the presence and society of one another. Those, because they found themselves delivered from their miseries, poverty, and necessities, wherein they had lived 10 entire months. These, because they were now considerably strengthened, to effect with greater satisfaction their designs. Hereupon, as soon as they were arrived at Gracias a Dios, they all put themselves into canoes and entered the river, being 500 men, leaving only 5 or 6 persons in each ship to keep them. They took no provisions, being persuaded they should find everywhere sufficient. But these their hopes were found totally vain, not being grounded on Almighty God. For he ordained it so that the Indians, aware of their coming, all fled, not leaving in their houses or plantations, which for the most part border on the sides of rivers, any necessary provisions or victuals. Hereby, in a few days after they had quitted their ships, they were reduced to most extreme necessity and hunger, but their hopes of making their fortunes very soon animating them for the present, they contented themselves with a few green herbs, such as they could gather on the banks of the river. Yet all this courage and vigor lasted but a fortnight, when their hearts, as well as bodies, began to fail for hunger, insomuch as they were forced to quit the river, and betake themselves to the woods, seeking out some villages where they might find relief, but all in vain, for having ranged up and down the woods for some days, without finding the least comfort, they were forced to return to the river, where being come, they thought convenient to descend to the sea coast where they had left their ships, not having been able to find what they sought for. In this laborious journey they were reduced to such extremity that many of them devoured their own shoes, the sheaths of their swords, knives, and other such things, being almost ravenous and eager to meet some Indians, intending to sacrifice them to their teeth. At last they arrived at the sea coast, where they found some comfort and relief to their former miseries, and also means to seek more. Yet the greatest part perished through faintness and other diseases contracted by hunger, which also caused the remaining part to disperse, till at last by degrees many or most of them fell into the same pit that Lolonois did, of whom and of whose companions, having given a compendious narrative, I shall continue with the actions and exploits of Captain Henry Morgan, who may deservedly be called the second Lolonois, not being unlike or inferior to him, either in achievements against the Spaniards, or in robberies of many innocent people. End of Chapter 8, Part 2. Recording by Acacia Wood.